Thanks for tuning in at Brackies.
Hello everyone and welcome to video number 10 on making a multiplayer FPS in Unity. In today's video we're gonna have a look at creating 3 different things. So first up will be disabling the graphics for our local player so that they won't go in front of the camera and be annoying. So that's kind of an important fix to make. Second, we are going to be adding our first player GUI element, which is going to be a crosshair. And third, we are going to be removing the warnings that has been displaying in the console since we last updated Unity. So the version of Unity that I'm going to be using today is 5.3.1. And at the end of this tutorial, we should be warning free. So that's awesome. Another thing that's awesome is that this is already video number 10. I'm really enjoying making this series. I hope you're enjoying watching it too. If you are, you know what to do. So let's jump right into today's video. Cool. So you can see here that I've already opened up Unity 5.3.1 and pretty much everything is as we left it last. And you can see that we have these annoying console warnings. So just don't bother to look at them right now. What we are going to bring our attention to at first is the disabling of this annoying graphic here. So when we go and host this, you can see that our player graphics are in the game, which is great, but we can also see them for our local player, which is kind of not so great. So we want to kind of disable these. And the method that I want to be using in order to do this is by using the built-in culling mask functionality of the Unity camera. So if we go under our player here and go to the camera object, you can see that there's a property here called culling mask, and it's currently set to everything. What this allows us to do is we can add a layer and add certain game objects to that layer and then uncheck that layer from this list, and then it won't be drawn. Simply, none of the shadows will be drawn, none of the graphics or particles, anything on that layer won't be drawn. So that's really, really easy to do, and it's going to function quite well. So let's start by adding a new layer. So simply go to add layer here, and the layer that we want to add, we're simply going to call it don't draw. It's very easy. Make sure you spell this correctly throughout the tutorial. That's very important, of course. Then we can go to the camera, go under the culling mask and simply disable don't draw, and now everything's going to draw except what is on the don't draw layer. You can of course also disable other stuff here too. Great. So what we then need to do is, you might think, well, let's go under the graphics and change the layer here to don't draw. No, because then when we spawn in the player for all of the different clients that are connected, none of the graphics are going to draw because it's going to spawn with the don't draw layer associated to it. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to set this through script only if we are the local player. And a pretty relevant place to do that would be in the player setup script. So let's double click that to open it up in Visual Studio, and we'll just add a few lines of codes to this. I'll show you a pretty nifty way to do it. Then we add a serialized field here, and this is going to be a string, and that's of course going to store the name of our layer. You could just hard code this in, but I'm going to stick to the convention that we've made here, where we have the layer names available in the inspector. So this is going to be the don't draw layer name, and that's simply going to default to don't draw. There we go. And next up, I simply want a slot here, serialized field, which is going to be a game object, and this is going to be a reference to our player graphics. So player graphics. There we go. Then in the start method, you can see that we check if we are not the local player. Well, then we want to disable some components that we only want to, the local player to have enabled, such as movement. But this is quite the opposite. So we go down into the else statement here, where we disable our scene camera. And just below that, we can disable player graphics for local player. And the way that we do this is by making a method ourselves, which is going to be the set layer recursively. So we're going to add this in recursively. I think that's how you spell it. And it's going to we're going to pass in our player graphics and the layer. But we're going to pass in the layer as an integer. So to convert it, we go to layer mask dot name to layer. That will take in the string and find it and return the index as an integer. So we simply pass in here the don't draw layer name and close that off and a semicolon. So we haven't actually created this method yet, but it's very, very easy and handy. So this is the first recursive function that we've made. And what is a recursive method? I don't want to go into too much technicality with this, but basically we're making a method that is calling itself. So we are making a self-referring method. And that sounds very scary. And you definitely have to be careful, because if you can very easily get into an infinite loop, and if you do that inside, let's say, the update method, well then the next frame is never going to be reached, and therefore your game is going to crash. So recursive methods are definitely dangerous, but just think about them very hard before you actually implement them in a game, or at least test them out. So we're going to make a void method here, and it's simply going to be called setLayer recursively. There we go. And it's going to take in the game object, and then the layer, which is going to be an integer, and that's going to be the new layer here. So what this method will do is it will, of course, change the layer of the object that we've set here, but it will also change the layer of all of the child objects, because Unity doesn't actually have a good way of doing this, and that's why we are making this method. So what we first want to do is change the object layer here. So simply say obj.layer equals new layer. Then we want to loop through all of the different child objects and do the same for those. So we're going to say for each, and then we're going to say transform. We're going to call it child in obj.transform. So that's going to go through all of our different child objects and refer to them as child. And you might be thinking, well, then we simply say child.gameObject.layer equals new layer. And that's fine if you only want to loop through all of the different children and set them equal to a new layer. This is not a recursive method, and the problem with this is that it won't affect children of children or children further down the hierarchy. So this will only go through the first children that it finds. And that's a problem because we wanted to change all of the stuff under our graphics object. So what we do instead, and some of you might have figured this out, is we call the setLayer recursively function. So we call the method inside the method, and we pass in child.gameObject, and again just the new layer. So the first time that we go through this, it takes the player graphics, calls it an object, sets it equal to the layer that we've passed in here. Then it goes through all of the children of the player graphics object and it calls the same method here. So for the first child, it's going to set the layer, and it's going to look at all of those children and do the same. And you can see it very quickly branches out through the hierarchy. So if you have a lot of different nested objects, this is going to require a lot of processing. So it might not be the cheapest method, but it's going to work just fine for our purposes, because we are only doing this in the start method, and frankly, we don't have that many game objects. So that's going to be just fine, and that's basically all we needed to do, I think. So let's jump back into Unity here, and you can see that I'm getting some weird errors here, and I think you can just ignore those. Those are errors from Unity. So now, if we simply hit play, I think we should be able to try this out. So let's go and do LAN host. And no, of course, we forgot to reference the player graphics here. So expand that prefab, go into camera, and drag that in there. Excuse me, I'm just going to have a sip of water here. And we can keep going. Good. So make sure you reference the camera and that this layer name is correct. And let's try this again. So hit play. LAN host, and something is not working. Let's go through here and see. Okay, so these aren't actually being set. For some reason, Unity is throwing a bunch of errors here, and I'm kind of afraid that that's the reason that this is not working. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to quickly restart Unity here, and I will be right back with you. So just give me 1 second, and I'll be back. Okay, so I've looked a bit around here and also done some searching on the internet, and I actually found out what was wrong with our game. So the reason for these errors is something that has been wrong with the Unity editor for a little while now, concerning certain particle systems that are set up. And the behavior is really weird and only happens on some systems, and I'm definitely going to write out a bug report. But it's not something that actually breaks the game, so I think we're just going to be continuing here. The reason why the other stuff wasn't working is because I forgot that it's not the camera that we need to drag in here, it's the graphics object. There we go. So now it works. The last thing that I decided to do here was that I was messing around with ways to get these warnings to disappear. And I found out that it of course was the particle systems under the thrusters that were causing the problem. And then I had a look at this model once again, and I actually decided that I like it better without the thrusters. I kind of like the way it looks here, just as this round ball thing. So that's what I'm going to be going for now, at least until Unity fixes this error. If you want me to look into this more, I can of course do so, and then I suggest you leave a comment or go to the forums, and they'll definitely help you out. But it's not something that we have time for to look more into in this video, and frankly not something that I might be able to solve if it's a deep problem within Unity. So I'm just going to be disabling those now, and you can disable the particle systems or try and mess around with them. There's plenty of information on this on the forum if you're getting the same warnings or errors. Cool. So I'm just going to hit apply on this guy now and delete him. And we should be seeing this working. So if we go under LAN host, you can see. And then of course it doesn't, so wait, I must have screwed something up. If we go into the camera here, yeah, of course, uncheck the don't draw there. I believe I checked that back on when experimenting. So now you can see that everything is drawing in the scene, and this is how it will appear to other players, but inside of the local view here, you see nothing. Nothing is obstructing the camera, and you can see that the shadow is also gone now, which I kind of like. So that was actually fairly easy. At some point we might make a separate method for drawing the gun if, say, you don't want the shadow down here, or in order to fix clipping issues like these. It's not too bad with this gun, but it might get worse with others, and we'll maybe have a look at that at some other point, but that's going to be fine for now. So on to point 2 of this video, which was making the crosshair. So let's start by actually making the asset. I'm going to be using Photoshop for this. I'm going to, of course, include it in both the GitHub project, which you can download, and in the assets pack, which you will find on the Brackeys website under this project, of course. And you can also find your own on the internet. It's very easy to make this kind of stuff or find it. There's lots of royalty-free crosshairs on the internet. So I'm just going to call this crosshair, and there are a bunch of ways to design a crosshair. First off, double click on the background, rename this BG, and let's fill that out with a gray color. And yeah, let's just quickly add something in here. So let's go under the ellipse tool here, and let's set the radius here to something like 10 pixels. The color is going to be white. Let's try and drag something out here. I'm also going to, whoops, I want that to still be there, but drag down some guidelines so we can find the center of our canvas. And that looks actually kind of decent. Might need to move that in a bit, or simply scale that in here so that we have room for a stroke around it later. It's actually too much scaling. There we go. I'm simply going to duplicate this and move it over here. Also select these two duplicate them again, I'm using Control J to duplicate them and simply rotate them around here. In order to rotate them, I'm using Shift. Or first off, I press Control T and to bring up the transform controls, and then Shift and rotate. So that's kind of how I was doing that. And this looks very decent, except that we have a off by 1 pixel here. So I think that we are going to give this canvas 1 more pixel to work with. I know that this is kind of forbidden, but it's going to be good. Don't worry. So there we go. And that kind of introduced some artifacting, so let's do that. Let's find the different pieces here. That's that one. We're going to move that one over. These are of course not correct anymore, so that's the center there, and that's the center there, and this is already looking better. So now we can take the bottom one and move that down, and for some reason this is still looking kind of wrong. Can't quite put a finger on what it is. Something is still off here, so it might be the bottom crosshair that we need to move up actually. Yeah, that was what was wrong. We can take, yeah, so this whole thing is not going to be exactly centered on the image, but that's all right because now we're going to be adding a stroke. So let's just add a group for these. Just call this crosshair. Add all of these to the crosshair group and double click on that, go under stroke, and I'm just going to add a simple black stroke here. That's going to be fine. And this already looks kind of decent, so that's cool. We can of course just crop this image to fit. There we go. So hide the guidelines, pressing Control H, hide the background, and let's save this. So I'm just going to save mine under projects, multiplayer FPS assets, and then make a folder called GUI. And let's save it just as a crosshair here. Remember, you can save Photoshop files directly into Unity and it's going to work just fine. So we have the crosshair here. Let's change the texture type to sprite and UI. And let's hit true color, bilinear, apply. Cool. So now we can go inside of the hierarchy, right click, go under UI, then select image, go under the canvas, make sure you select pixel perfect. Go back to the image, reset that. We can focus in on this, change to 2D mode. So we've reset that. You can also center it by holding down Alt and clicking here. And then we want to set the native size after we've dragged in the crosshair there. So drag in the crosshair, hit select native size. And you might be thinking that this is a bit too big. So what we can do is simply scale this down. So we can go under the image size and we can bump this down to whatever you would like to. So I'm trying 24, something like that. Hit set native size, and I actually think this looks pretty damn good. So let's try and hit play here. Go into LAN host, and you can see just how that looks. This might actually be a bit too large for me. So what we can do instead is we can take some of these, simply scale them down a bit. So there we go. There we go. And I'm not going to be spending forever on this. You might want to correct it so that this is actually a complete square with equal sides and all that. It's not something that I'm too worried about right now, at least. I think this is going to be fine. And you can see this one for some reason looks a bit off compared to the others. So this is the kind of stuff that you should definitely sit down and get working when you make this. Okay, so I'm actually kind of satisfied with this. We could try just point filtering. It doesn't make a huge difference, so I'm just going to stick with bilinear for now. Good, so let's rename this to Crosshair. And the canvas here to Player UI. And what we can do is we can add a few lines to the setup script that will spawn this in once the player spawns, and again remove it once he disconnects. So let's go under our player setup script, double click that, open it up in Visual Studio once again. And this is very easy. So what we're going to do here is add a new field, serialize field, and this is going to be a game object, and it's going to store the player UI prefab. Then we're going to have a private game object, which is going to be the player UI instance. There we go. Then in the start method, if we are the local player, down here after we disable the player graphics, well then we want to create player UI. We do that by simply instantiating it. So instantiate, and we want to instantiate the player UI prefab. There we go, and it's just going to be 0, 0, 0 position and scale and all that. Or scale is going to be vector 3.1, of course. And then we can set the player UI instance equal to that instantiation. So that's going to work just fine. And if we want, we can also say that player UI.instance.name should be equal to player UI prefab.name. That way we get rid of the clone part. That's not something that looks very pretty in the hierarchy. And then down here on disable, when we are cleaning up, re-enabling the scene camera and unregistering the player, we can also, of course, destroy the player UI again. So we're simply going to say player or destroy player UI instance. Bam, and that's all we need to do. So let's try and hit play here. We are not going to be seeing, oops. We are not going to be seeing any crosshair when we begin because we need to remove this. I always skip a few steps apparently. So I'm just gonna remove the clear and play there. So let's make a prefab out of this. Do we have a prefabs folder? We do not yet. And delete it. Then we're going to go into the player. And there's going to be a new field under the player setup where we can drag in our player UI. Now we hit play and there's no crosshair. We join a game and there it is. It's that easy. And when we hit stop again, the crosshair disappears. So that's kind of dynamic and nice. And we're just going to stick with that. We can drag this player UI under the GUI folder. For now, we might have it in a prefabs folder. Actually, I want to create a prefabs folder. I think that's a better idea. So let's just do that right there. Gonna GUI, get that back in there and that into the prefabs folder. That's much nicer. Stay organized. Cool. So now that we have all this functionality working, all we need to do is clear up the console. Well, right now the console isn't exactly appearing. So let's just quickly, and this is a bit of a hacky way of doing things, create an error here, remove that error, let Unity recompile things, and there we go. The console warnings are back. So the first ones that you can see here are the ones that we have actually caused. And that's onto the player controller. And that's because it used to use this kind of stupid thing called the joint drive mode. Well, this can actually just be deleted now. So we are just going to completely remove that. And also down here, remove that mode. Hit save and boom, all of those warnings disappear. Next up, we actually have some warnings for the standard assets, which for some reason aren't appearing right now. I can go ahead and just quickly restart the project here. If some of you know a nicer way to get the warnings to appear, I know you can re-import everything, but that takes a while. I just like restarting the project. If that actually would cause them, okay, for some reason they aren't displaying at the moment. That might be because of some recent update. But anyways, some of these are actually also causing errors, and I remember, or warnings, I remember which one of them it is. So the event system checker, that's something that I want to get rid of. Let's just reload that and close that. There we go. Oh, here they are. Okay, so here we can see all of them. So we have the touch input. Okay, so this is under scripts, mobile, that's cross-platform. We have a bunch under the utility here. So we have the forced reset. Let's just find that. Forced reset there. I'm just going to delete them. I'm simply deleting these files because we aren't actually using them. Then we have the timed object activator. That's this one, not the destructor. We also have, if we go into the console, we also have the particle system destroyer. There we go. Of course, if you're using these, you should go in there and clean up the code. But since we aren't, or I am not using these, I'm simply going to delete them because they're just using space anyways. You can always re-import these, and therefore I just want them out of my project. It was annoying enough to have them there when they weren't causing errors. Then we can go under our standard assets particle systems scripts, and we should find the water hose particle script. Let's delete that. And finally, if we go under cross-platform scripts and then find the mobile control rig, and let's delete that too. So now we have a working project. We have a project where we can see our own player model, which is great. We don't get any warnings, and we have introduced the first player UI element. So that was basically all I had to show for this tutorial. I hope you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one.